So, as you know, this is the meanings of America. What do we mean by that? I just want to touch on this every time so we know what we're doing here. We are really talking about the mythologies of America. And I don't mean by that falsehood, as in all lowercase myth. There's plenty of that going around. You can find plenty of people talking about the myths of whatever. I also don't mean the particular stories, although we'll use those stories. For example, this week, the story of the Declaration of Independence and the birth of the nation. I'm really after the true stories, myth, all caps, as the stories that move us. I don't mean emotionally, stories that make us act in the world as Americans. And so these stories are experiential, they're not ontological. They're stories we experience, we live out. And they are active, they're not inert, unlike some of the stories you read in books and such. And they're generally hidden. Because myths, in Western culture, the way myths work is that they cannot be manifest, they must be latent. And that goes back to what we were talking about last time with this fundamental fragment in the world for Western peoples, is that the world is broken in two, and you can't really get past that chasm. And so you have to have a new heaven and a new earth. So for us, mythology cannot be in the foreground. It has to be in the background. There are all kinds of reasons for that I can get into if you want to. But we can be certain that we'll blame Plato for this eventually. I can do it very quickly. It has to do with writing and speech. It has to do with mythos, which is the original word for myth, which means story and is related to the word mouth. Which was the way of being and the way of speaking and the way of thinking for the entire world and for most of human history until Plato introduced something called logos, truth. Right? So in mythos, all you need is meaning. You need to make meaning in the world. You make it however you want. It doesn't matter if somebody else makes a different meaning. That doesn't matter at all. Because that's their meaning. This is your meaning. No problem. I mean, there were problems. People fought and argued and such. But not over the truth, they didn't. Because there wasn't such a thing. And you may remember my story that I repeated often during the World Religions course of the missionary coming to the synagogue in upstate New York and giving them the gospel. And they said, cool, let me give you a story about the origin of corn. The missionary is offended, says, I gave you the truth. You give me fable and falsehood. And they say, we believed your story, why won't you believe ours? Right? So that was the world until Plato. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but you said to be quick. Logos, the notion of truth, set in opposition to mythos, story and meaning. How do you get to logos? How do you get to the truth? Through dialectic and through argument. How many truths are there? One. And so now we have something to fight over, don't we? Right. Emily, did you have your hand? Oh, what a great question. No, I don't think there are. The closest one would be truth. But now we're back into that trap Plato laid for us. Right. What a great question. The question... Capital... Yeah, myth... Sorry, let me back up. Myth, this story right here. I just found out we have a laser pointer here. Promise not to point it at you. So yeah, what's the synonym for that? Brilliant. There isn't one. Because truth elides everything. It just covers over everything. That's what it's designed to do. Right? So, well, since we're talking about this, if you ask me, the problem, you didn't ask me, but I'm going to tell you, the problem with religions is that they forget their history, which is they're about meaning. They're not about truth. They were never about truth. They were never Platonic. They were always about story. You take truth out. You take that tyranny of truth out of religion, what do you got? You've got people making meaning, figuring their way, finding their way. Yeah, Brahmovit. Sure, stories. Which is how we live anyway, right? I mean, we still live by the stories. We just can't say they're stories that we live by. We have to say we live by the truth, right? Otherwise, we might be in falsehood. What does that mean? You okay, Emily? Does that make any sense? Okay. You look like you had a headache. Okay. So there you go, Sutinder. Myth makes meaning. Even when you have truth, you're still after meaning. You want pure truth? Do mathematics. You want to live by mathematics? Good luck. Okay. Sorry, I'm in sermon mode today for some reason. The myths of the religious nation. Tonight, the religious nation. What does that mean? What can that mean? All kinds of things, obviously. We probably immediately think of the Christian nation, right? That's in the air and in the water here. America is a Christian nation. We're going to talk about what that means and what it might mean. There's less talk about this these days, but there was talk about the religious nation being a secular nation, meaning that it was a nation that did not promote religion, that it had religion, but the government did not promote it. The secular nation. The pluralist nation, which is going to relate next week to the immigrant nation, right? So we're obviously a nation of many people from many places. All those religions make us a pluralist nation, which is true. But then what do you do with that? Some people want to deny it, maybe build a wall to stop it from happening. Some people want to celebrate it. But it creates its own difficulties when you have a pluralist nation. And then, of course, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's true. There are people who fear that the United States is becoming a Muslim nation that's going to operate by Sharia law. I wouldn't say this if it weren't actually out there, because it sounds so ridiculous, but it is out there. I don't know if you remember, this was a few years ago, they were going to build a Muslim center near the site of 9/11. It was not a mosque. It was just a center for Muslims together, and people freaked out because how could we have an Islamic center? I don't know, but I keep hearing this. I promise you, I hear it in the media, and I hear it with people who find out I'm a religion professor and say, "What about Sharia law?" And I just say, "What about Mosaic law?" Same thing. We don't do either of those here. Anyway, so see, sermon mode. I'm sorry. All right. Yes. Well, it certainly is. But it's not just that. I don't think you were saying that, right? Right. It is. It is this. All right. So many religious people in America operate with huge categories, just huge categories, right? So if a terrorist says Allahu Akbar, he is a Muslim. He goes here in this category. And over here is Christian. And over here is maybe one other category, or maybe not. Right? 2 or 3 categories. The whole world's in 2 or 3 categories. That makes life simpler. It also makes life more difficult because you can't do that. Because you end up tying yourself in knots and getting all kinds of trouble, and you end up, for example, supporting the terrorists when you do that, because one of the things they want most is to be recognized as Islamic, and you just did it for them, right? So it gets very tricky. The religious nation is really the chosen nation. That's where it begins, the chosen nation. We were talking about Judaism. That's Judaism's concept, right? The American nation was seen at its founding, well, before its founding, as the chosen nation. Why? Well, and it's also related to the exceptional nation. So, by the way, when you see that phrase, American exceptionalism, it's covering over a religious foundation, right? It's a synonym for the chosen people, right? So, this goes to the Protestant Reformation. I'll try not to inflict too much of that on you. Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, whatever, he wanted to get a divorce. The Pope wouldn't let him, so he created the Church of England so he could get a divorce, which was a Protestant sort of church. It was not a Catholic church, so that he could get his divorce and marry Anne Boleyn. The key thing here is William Tyndale, a man named William Tyndale, who wanted to do an English New Testament. And he did, in fact, in 1526. He did an English New Testament. It did not get circulated widely. That was at the beginning of the Henry VIII thing. Later on, Henry, who was a mess, as you know, is losing influence and power. And so Tyndale does another one in 1534, and this one takes off. Everybody's now reading this New Testament in England. And keep in mind, this is during the religious wars, so there's blood in the streets in England and in Europe, on the continent. Tyndale does the translation, but he also does introductions and commentary. And in it, he picked up the Jewish notion of the chosen nation and applied it to England. So, this English New Testament going around, right? So, plus there's this new movement called Protestantism, where you don't need a priest to get to God. I mean, it was a heady, exciting, dangerous time. Now you can read the New Testament for yourself in English. And you know what the commentary says? That you, British sir and ma'am, are the chosen people. Very important. And reactivating it. But that's how myth works. You never just resurrect an old myth. You have to resurrect it by reapplying it, right? So you put it in a new context, and it works beautifully, and it worked beautifully here. And so I'm not going to talk about Edward VI, but there are people, these new Protestants, Anglicans, and then on the continent, Reformation people, Anabaptists, etc., who are very upset with the Catholic Church and even with the Anglican Church in England. Why? Because They think that if they are the chosen people, again, the myths and metaphors get mixed up here, but they have to restore the primitive church. Or, because remember what happens to the chosen people. It's not a blessing to be the chosen people always. It means you get punished, right? So sure, we're the chosen people here in England, but that also means that God will punish us. And they thought, sure enough, God will punish us if we do not get our Anglican and other houses in order. You may remember Bloody Mary, Mary Queen of Scots, who after Henry comes in and just obliterates Protestants. That she was called Bloody Mary because she just killed them all. Not all, but most. The Anglicans flee to the continent. Here it is. They ask why God is punishing them through Bloody Mary. They determine that they have now failed to restore the primitive church, and they must do it. They must return and purify Anglicanism. Puritans. Who learned something else over on the continent. They learned Calvinism. Calvinism is the foundation of Presbyterianism, and basically what they learned is a new church structure, a more democratic church structure. So sure, you've got the Catholic structure, which is obviously top down. You've got the Vicar of Christ. Why would you not do what he says? The Anglicans borrowed heavily from the Catholic Church, almost indistinguishable at times, except with the communion, Eucharist. Lutherans, Martin Luther was a Catholic who wanted the Catholic Church to be better. He didn't think of himself as a Lutheran, so very close to Catholicism still. But now they see Calvinism. Calvinism's very different. There's no head of the church. No head of the church. Local congregations report up to a presbytery, and then they make decisions. It's very local and democratic. All right. So, very good. So, certain groups that were on the continent said that there was no hope of restoring Anglicanism. They just didn't see any hope. They thought that was their mission. Now they see there's no hope. So they become separatists or pilgrims. They found Plymouth Colony in 1620. All right? So Puritans and Pilgrims are very close, but they have this difference. The Puritans still think they're going to reform Anglicanism. In fact, they think they're going to come to America and go back and reform Anglicanism. Now, if you'd like to see some contemporary Pilgrims, just go to First Congregational Church of Los Angeles over here on 6th and Commonwealth. That's who that church is. They trace their lineage back to the Mayflower. So you've got these three colonies. You've got the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is Puritans, right? Salem witch trials, Cotton Mather, those people. You've got the Plymouth Colony, the earlier colony, with William Bradford, remember that name, who wrote a text called A Plymouth Plantation. And then you've got the Jamestown Colony, 1607 in Virginia. Completely different. These were businessmen. This was a business venture. Sure, there's some religion in there, but it's mostly about making money. Okay. That split between the northern colonies and the southern colonies, that's still with us today in the North and South. So, what did these Puritans and Pilgrims want? They wanted freedom. I put it in quotation marks because it was a certain kind of freedom. They wanted freedom from state religion. They wanted freedom from those religious wars, but they also wanted to create a theocracy, right? These are our Puritan friends, right? They're not secularists. They're not pluralists. They're tight-assed Puritans, right? Who are going to guard and watch everything you do. So to say that these people were about freedom is limited at best. They wanted the freedom to impose their will on other people in a new place. Okay? And they wanted to be a new Israel in the New World, and they took their cue directly from Tyndale's New Testament that spoke of England as the chosen nation. And of course, if that's true, then America is the promised land, right? So, as Satinder said, dusting off an old myth, sure thing. Myths work. They put you in a boat and send you across the Atlantic and make you undertake this voyage to someplace you know not where, and if you're going to survive or how you're going to live. All right. Now, last time we talked about the native nation. So if you're operating according to the chosen nation myth, and if you're looking for the promised land and you have found it and you have landed on the eastern shore, and there are people here, who are those people? Those native people we talked about last time, they are clearly Canaanites. And in Joshua and Judges, these are the people who must be killed. In Joshua, these are the people who must be killed. God commands Joshua to kill these people, wipe them off the face of the earth. They're in their homeland. Judges, the book of Judges, is a little bit different. It's a little more realistic, probably. It's these uneasy encounters and wars and wins and losses for the Israelites, but eventually they move in. So this creates all sorts of mythological confusion for the settlers, colonizers, because, all right, and this is the problem with every myth. It doesn't fit perfectly. No myth fits perfectly. If it did, we'd be done, and we wouldn't need any more myths. So they got these people here, and they're, okay, they're Canaanites symbolically, but who are they really? Well, you may know the name William Penn, who founded the state of Pennsylvania. Quaker, brilliant man, accomplished man. He reasons this out within his myth, right? And he says, well, they're not Christians, these people. Clearly not Christians. They don't know anything of Christ. They don't have a church, whatever. I don't think they worship the devil. They just don't seem to worship the devil. They're generally pretty kind. There are no devil symbols, demonic symbols. Therefore, they are Jews. That's an old story for us in America. We're finding Jews all over the place on this continent. Joseph Smith's going to find them 200 years later in Illinois. But you see, the myth can't expand to incorporate the groups, those big categories I was talking about. And so you just put these people over here. They're Jews. They've got two myths going. We talked about this last time. Wilderness for the Puritans was also the domain of Satan. And so there are some indications that the native people are Satan's horde. Again, just using these huge categories, trying to place them. So the wilderness then becomes a place that must be exorcised of its people, of its resources. And it's kind of the Judeo-Christian thing. It's like, okay, we're going to acknowledge that this is where we came from, but also you guys killed the Messiah. So just saying, don't forget that. It's this odd relationship. And we're going to take all your religious categories and use them. And thank you for creating those. But remember, you killed the Messiah. Okay. We talked last time about the native response to contact, which was various, but generally it was generosity. Columbus talks about this. They just give everything. Vespucci talked about it. They just hand over whatever the Europeans asked for. Military losses, illness and death. The large majority of native losses were due to diseases they'd never encountered. All that is proof of your myth. It's proof that you're the chosen people. It's proof that this is the promised land, because God is clearing the way with all these deaths. Smallpox, tuberculosis, etc. Now, just so you get the fuller picture, there was dissent in the European camp here. Roger Williams, founder of Rhode Island, said, this isn't right. Roger Williams, founder of Rhode Island, says, this is not right. We can't treat these people this way. And attempted to defend. Remember, like Bartolome de las Casas did, the Spaniard? We can't do this. The result, he was expelled from the colony. In fact, he was expelled and wandered down to the swamps of Rhode Island and founded Rhode Island. There was another dissenter named Anne Hutchison, who was amazing, apparently. She would hold a Puritan woman, who would hold these, basically they were salons. We would later in France call them salons, where she would invite the women of the village to come by and they would talk about what they'd heard in church, or they would do what we're doing. They just talk about stuff. A woman in a Puritan settlement doing this. She didn't last very long. And in fact, it's suggested, I think this is probably right, that she was the model for Hester Prynne in The Scarlet Letter. A nasty woman, shall we say. She persisted. All right. Was America a Christian nation? You bet it was, before America was founded. With the Puritans and the Pilgrims, Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth, yes, it was religious. It was quasi-Anglican, quasi-Protestant. It was its own thing, developing according to this myth of the chosen people in the promised land. Why isn't it still? Because of another myth called Nature's Nation. Nature's Nation. This is a product of the Enlightenment, or the Age of Reason. So, you know about this, I suspect. It's the development of science that begins with Francis Bacon in the 17th century and then goes through the Enlightenment and Voltaire and philosophers and scientists who are looking for another paradigm besides the theological one. And it's, in the 17th century, it's a proto-scientific one. We saw in the last course Thomas Hobbes kind of doing this. He's trying to build something that's, even though he's using a biblical metaphor, he's really trying to build a rational state. Well, this gets taken up by John Locke and Jeremy Bentham and others, and it reaches its full flower in America, where reason, not religion, is the ultimate authority. But this is what I was talking about before, where we're going to get into this tension. It is a competing myth to the myth of the church, regardless of the church, Catholic or Protestant. It's also a repudiation, a myth that challenges the aristocracy. So, pretty powerful myth. We call it democracy, and its religion is deism. So, deists believed, such as Thomas Jefferson there, believed that God authored two books, nature and the Bible. The Bible was flawed, they said. So nature supersedes the Bible. Reason supersedes belief. Sure, have your belief, but don't let it contradict reason. Nature is clear, it's self-evident. It's one of their favorite phrases. The Bible is not clear. In fact, Jefferson said we should edit the Bible, and he did. He took scissors to the New Testament and cut out all the miracles and said, nah, that didn't happen. But this statement, love your neighbors, you love yourself, that's excellent. So the Jefferson Bible is about that big. He stripped it. Thomas Jefferson, one of our founders, so-called, one of our presidents for sure. Remember, they were sick of fighting about religion. So many people had died on both sides, on all sides, and they had died horribly and for stupid reasons, according to the deists. Because they're arguing over these little doctrines and things, and the world is pretty clear in front of you, and you're arguing about whether the body and blood the bread and wine actually become the body and blood, and you're going to die for this or kill for this? Just step back, dude. Look at nature. Let nature teach you. It was a religion without doctrine, with basically a high God. They did believe in God. They believed in a creator God, kind of a high God, who made the world and then let it go. Started it spinning and then put the laws in place, and then it's automatic from then on. It's not a God who intervenes in history and says, let my people go. It's not that God. It's a creator God. And he created the laws. And we live by the laws. And our job is to understand the laws, not to understand some book, unless the book contains some of the laws. Thomas Jefferson truly thought the most prominent religion in America would be the Unitarian Church. Why? Because they adhere to all this. They don't have a deity. They're more interested in reason and rationality. They're open. He now naively thought that Unitarianism would be the predominant church in America. All right, so let's understand this clearly. In the arguments about whether this is a Christian nation, what you're going to see is people who want this to be a Christian nation seeing references to God and saying, see, that's God. Well, it's not your God. It's the deist God. And for deists, we've got to remember in this discussion that that is Christianity. They have stripped Christianity of its, I almost said myths, I don't want to say that. They've stripped Christianity of its falsehoods and taken the essence of it. And that is Christianity, the essence, not the other stuff like the miracles. So when you hear deists talking about God, they believe, or talking about Christianity, they believe that that's the Christianity that we can salvage. They deny the divinity of Jesus. Now, you tell me how that's a Christian nation if people deny the divinity of Jesus. Self-evident truth. We hear that and we go, yeah, we know. No, you don't know what that is. That is a powerful philosophical statement. Self-evident truths. These are things that are in nature. They are written in nature's book, not some other book. And they are consistently available and have no need of translation or interpretation. Those are the truths they're talking about. There's no Christian doctrine in the founding documents. None. And of course, if these gentlemen were founding a Christian nation, why would they expressly forbid the establishment of religion? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. There is the paradox, the genius, impossible paradox. Right? We're going to allow all religion and support none. Allow all religion and support none. It's genius. And unique in the world, by the way, yes. Finally, how do we know that America was not founded as a Christian nation, as America? Remember, the colonies were certainly religious. It's because there was a revolt in the United States against the founding of the United States, right? Some Christians called the founders arch infidels for not establishing a state church. Remember the Puritans? It's not that they wanted freedom for everyone. They wanted freedom to limit other people's freedom. And so their descendants are angry. Now remember, this has not happened in the world before. In Europe, in Asia, in Africa, the Middle East, there's never been a separation of church and state in the world. So imagine how hard this is to get your head around in the 18th century. And it appears threatening to the people who know only a state church and want their religion to be the state church. And if they can't get into the head of Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and John Hancock and these guys, they can't see far enough ahead or deep enough to understand the genius of this. They only see that they're not being favored by the government. So there was a revolt along these lines. They saw the founding of America, not the settling of America, but the founding of the state as a rational attack, an Enlightenment attack on faith. And it was. They were right. It was an attack on faith. Saying, you just can't believe this stuff and have a nation at the same time. Look back at England. Look back at France. It doesn't work, and we're done with it. The French Revolution, 1789, scared the shit out of people, right? Because again, remember, the aristocracy now is being overturned in France. And more than overturned, they're being beheaded, right? And same thing, this Enlightenment ideal takes place in France with the Encyclopedia, and it's the Enlightenment come to create states, democracies, in fact. So let's not forget, this is democracy. Democracy is a product of the Enlightenment. It's rational in concept and very ugly and slow and painful in practice. Also, there were new settlers coming into the South from Scotland and Ireland, and they were a little rough. And so a lot of the Christian people of the nation thought, these immigrants, we don't need them here. They should go back, the Scots, to where they came from. Plus, they've really got to have religion or they're just going to be wild. So you're right, Satinder, it touched this nerve. And so what happens is the Second Great Awakening. Revival. The founding of the United States as democracy created revival in the country. It created a turn back to God. So just remember, if people try to tell you that Jefferson and those guys were Christians, why would there need to be revival as a result of what they did? This was 1801, the Second Great Awakening. The first one was in the 1730s and was not political in nature because there were no politics. There was no nation, right? At least nationally, there were no politics. Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, 1730. This was a different one. This one was a political response. It was a religious response to a political situation, namely the founding of this country. And it swept through, the revival swept through. All over, especially the South, but all over, in New York too. There was open and uncontrollable weeping at these meetings. They were slain in the Spirit. Anybody seen this? I grew up in the South. I've seen all this. People just fall over because they're overwhelmed with the Holy Spirit. They did something called barking up a tree. It's not what you think it is. So these people at the revival would be filled with the Spirit, and the Spirit would rock them back and forth. Like they would almost like touch the ground as they were slung back and forth by the Spirit. And so they would, and when they did that, it would cause an eruption of air that sounded like a bark. So they're being whiplashed by the Holy Spirit. So they would hang on to the tree, and okay, but it's still going on. So they're barking up the tree. This still goes on. I've hung out with these people. It's absolutely fascinating. They speak in tongues. Maybe you know that. I wanted to speak in tongues so badly, but it could never happen for me. Interestingly, the social gospel takes root during this time. So again, we shouldn't think in broad categories either. We should understand that there are nuances here. So if you get revival in America, does it mean everybody's barking up a tree? Not everybody. Some people say, hey, well, if I'm a Christian now, doesn't that mean I have to take care of the poor? And they do. This is the birth of the social gospel. You know what else they do? Hey, we can't hold slaves if we're Christians. That's wrong. Enter Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin. One of the, how shall we say, it's not great literature, but it's powerful literature. And it actually played a tremendous role in the abolition of slavery. So all this has happened. This is human activity. So it's complex, right? Here's the interesting thing to me. So this is, excuse me, this is 1801 and beyond. So early 19th century. William Bradford's of Plymouth Plantation, excuse me, that text was never published. It got lost. It ended up in London, and somebody found it. Do I have it here? Yeah, 1856. Somebody found it in a London bookshop. So enter into the American mythology William Bradford and his Of Plymouth Plantation about America's the chosen nation. That's a myth that was, I mean, it was obviously active, but it became inactive. Well, not inactive. It wasn't as prominent. Now we're pissed at the founders. Revival is sweeping the nation, and enter William Bradford. Here's the story of the arrival here and the founding of the chosen nation in the promised land. Some over 200 years after it was written. Divine providence? I don't know. People thought so. And so this kind of worship of Plymouth Plantation occurs. So for example, has anybody ever been to Plymouth? I used to live in New England. Of course, Frank's been everywhere. Yeah. There's a rock, right? Plymouth Rock. It's got 1620 carved in it. Completely made up. In the 19th century, as part of the new religion of Plymouth Plantation and this revival, right? So thank God they made it up, or Malcolm X could never have said, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. There is also, again, this is America, which is all kinds of people doing and thinking all kinds of things. There's an anti-Puritan element here in the 19th century and early 20th century. We revisit the Salem witch trial. So Puritanism becomes prominent again with William Bradford, and then we start to look at Puritanism. This is us, right? This is America. We're like, ooh, this is cool. Oh, these people suck, right? We do this consistently, and we love doing it to politicians, right? Oh, I like what she's saying. Oh, emails. Well, I can't vote for her or him or whatever. This is Hawthorne, Nathaniel Hawthorne. His body of work, one of his ancestors was a judge in Salem and participated in the witch trials, and he never forgave himself for it. And so a lot of his work is about the horror of being a Puritan. Right? Anybody been to Salem, Massachusetts? Yeah, isn't it pathetic? I mean, it's like you've got these people who are falsely accused of witchcraft, obviously, in the ground. And all around them is basically a carnival. T-shirts and cotton candy and tourism, right? You kind of have to fight your way through all the crap to see the actual place of the witch trials. H.L. Mencken, a great newspaper man, witty, cryptic, nasty guy. Puritanism. he defined as the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. William Carlos Williams, the great American Imagist poet in the early 20th century, by their very emptiness, they were the fiercest element in the battle to establish a European life in the New World. All right, last slide. The paradoxes I talked about of a religious nation. With many religions, you have identical and mutually exclusive claims to what? To truth. That means there's going to be war. There's going to be excommunication. There's going to be people inside and people outside.